I want to do a video today on asking the wrong questions, particularly in reference to Troy Grady's Cracking the Code and all of his videos on there. And while a lot of what Troy Grady says is actually very, very good, and a lot of his interviews are very, very good, there are a few players he's interviewed which give him a lot of problems to explain what they are doing, and also he's asking the wrong question in the first place. Now, this is a bit more of a controversial thing, but it's just my own opinion on how these things should be taught and what you should be thinking about. First things first, I'd like to say there is nothing virtuosic about iterative technique. And this is really, really important. At the end of the day, the only person who can improve your picking technique is you. And the only way you can do that is by experimenting with as many different subtleties and different variations on a theme until something clicks. So what happens a lot of the time when you watch these Troy Grady videos, particularly the interview with Oz Noy, I find fascinating, because Oz Noy has no idea what he's doing and he doesn't give a shit. And this is the thing, when you watch it, he's picking through these insane lines and he's picking so fast and it's so accurate, but he doesn't know if he's sweep picking it, he doesn't know if he's alternate picking it. I really recommend go away and watch that video, because they kind of come at this at cross swords. And Oz is just talking about, well, I just practiced until it worked. And then Troy Grady's trying to like overanalyze the technique and be like, oh, well, he's sweeping through these two strings and he's doing this, etc., etc. And yes, you can copy it, but the whole point is that Oz Noy's ability is one that's just tried to play something until it's worked, not worrying about whether his pick is at 17 degrees to the B string, etc., etc. He's just iterated it until it feels comfortable. So that's the first thing I want to mention, because again, the other player, if you want to see a really good interview on just general music, business and also technique, go and look up an interview with Brian Baker on YouTube, and you'll find it's exactly the same thing. Brian Baker can play almost everyone under the table. He is an impossibly hard person to imitate. He's on the same level, in my opinion, as someone like Alan Holdsworth was. However, in the interview, he said he never even practiced technique. He ends up playing like that because these are the things that he wanted to play, and his technique kind of adapted to fit the ideas he had on the neck. So these are two really interesting players to go and look at, because they have absolutely not a care in the world about overanalyzing technique, and yet they are monstrously good. With that said, there's a couple of things that both of them do, and that all of these Troy Grady Cracking the Code players, for the most part, apart from some of the acoustic players, are doing, which is not really covered too much, which I think is actually quite important. And that is looking at where the closest contact point is to the pick. It's a really simple question, and it stops you thinking about, okay, what angles am I using and how is my hand moving over the strings? That can be useful if you are going the complete wrong way. But one of the main setup problems people have is that they're actually not putting the contact points in the right place. So, basic physics. If I'm moving this pick up and down, and I'm rotating across the wrist, and let's say my last point of contact with anything, with either the guitar or the strings or whatever, is here. You can see the distance here. This is between my thumb and like the base of my hand here. Now, if I rotate around this point, that's all well and good, but every time I hit a string, I'm going to meet the resistance. I'm going to need quite a lot of force to get through it. The smaller I make this distance, the less force I'm going to need, because the moment's smaller. That's just how it is. It's a basic physics problem. And it's the same with this side of the hand as well. If I have my wrist here, and this is the last point of contact with the strings, then again, I'm rotating around here. The distance here is what I'm using. If I make that shorter and bring it up to here, again, I'm going to use less force to get through those strings, and therefore it's going to be a little bit easier for me. That's not to say you can't have two contact points, and these things tend to have exponential effects on how easy it is to play. So if I'm originally starting with contact points back here and I move them up, both of them simultaneously, so they're now sitting about here, my wrist is effectively rotating around this point. Now you can try this literally off the guitar. If you hold your wrist like this and you try and rotate that wrist and you see how stable that is, you'll notice that it's relatively stable, but when I put my fingers here, on either the lowest joint of the little finger there and the lowest joint of the thumb, it's much easier to kind of get things moving in really, really specific, accurate ways. If you go away and watch all of these interviews, and again, I do highly recommend watching Troy Grady's videos for this reason alone, what you'll find is that most of these players have one of two things. They either have a contact point here, really high up the thumb, or they have a contact point here, really high up the little finger. And just to demonstrate, if I'm picking, let's say I try and do it without doing that. So this is hard to film, and even from Troy Grady's perspective, it looks quite deceptive. What I'm doing here is I'm trying to rest this part of my hand here on, that's the last contact point on the guitar. And if I try and pick something like this, it's okay, but it's not that accurate. If I try and put this point here now, so I've moved this contact point way up to here, and I do the exact same thing. Hopefully you can see that's a little bit more, way more accurate than the previous one. All I've done there is I've basically, not quite flattened my hand, but I've had to drag my hand up a bit so that I've now got this last point of contact here is the last point on the strings. Now I can do the other way around as well. Again, there's not one way of solving this problem. If I go back to here, and now instead I rest the thumb side really high, again, I'm now resting it about here, and this is kind of like the point of contact I'm rotating around. This is going to do the exact same thing. Now, I'm not very good at that one because I don't really play like this, but you can get... If I iterate that a little bit, it'll probably get a bit cleaner. That's a bit better. Okay, so again, we can just try and do these things over and over again until they work, and that's one of the things I highly recommend. But the point is here, I'm keeping my way of thinking super simple. I'm not thinking about all these rotation motions. I'm letting those things happen naturally, trying to keep nice and relaxed so that if I do need one of those motions, I can do it. Again, if I do one of those kind of classic Paul Gilbert licks, that kind of thing. Again, I'm not really thinking about some of those like little turns and things because they happen quite naturally, provided that this contact point is here, because it allows my picking hand to make subtle motions really accurately. It's the same for the other side. Again, there is not one way of doing this. So sometimes you will see like some of these virtuoso players, they'll have this part. Andy Wood's a really good example of this. If you would watch Andy Wood's playing, it's all like he's always in contact here with the thumb at all points. I suspect as well he's actually in contact on the other side, but it's really hard to see. And you can see that if you watch, again, all of these videos that are coming out. So while I think sometimes it's worth working on this rotational technique, that is not the base point you are starting from. The base point is, how can I get these points of contact as far up my hand as I possibly can? And if I get these points of contact really close to my picking hand, I'm going to have a lot easier time just getting through the strings in general. And if that makes my life easier, then all of these other motions are built on that, and therefore they become easier. So it's one of these things which I think sometimes we've got the wrong end of the stick on. You're not looking to analyse the mechanics of someone's alternate picking or their economy picking. What you're instead trying to do is work out a way that is super comfortable and super accurate. And for most people, that's going to be getting those contact points as close as possible to whatever picking technique you're using. It doesn't really, again, it doesn't matter if I'm using a grip like this or a grip like this. I can iterate between the two and work something out that's comfortable. But the whole point is start trying some stuff out. Try and move some contact points up your hand, see what's comfortable. Try and move it up the other side. Try some different pick grips. Try messing around with this as well. This is the other thing that's quite important, is that some people, I've got quite long arms, I need to come up the guitar quite vertically. I can't do this because this is really uncomfortable for me. So I have to move the forearm up here. And that might seem weird to some people, but again, it's another thing you can iterate, is how far up the guitar is your forearm. The more of this you do, the better your technique will get. And it's nothing to do with some golden bullet that will suddenly fix your technique. It's all to do with iterating it slowly, which is what all of these virtuoso players have done at some point, even if they don't talk about it. So give all those things a go, and hopefully this has been a useful one for you to have a think about at least.